I'm your host, Darren Marr, and I am joined by two of the only people that think the hashtag Free Britney movement is actually Brittany trying to get independence from France. Jake Woolhead and Fionn Malloy. Lads, I thought I explained it to you last week about what was really happening, but I still think that you need to follow the news a little more.
I'm not one for this 24-hour news cycle, so what I'm reading the newspaper, it's just something I follow by for the rest of my life.
Yeah, pop culture's tricky. It's for the young kids. I'm a lengthy 26-year-old now, so I'm well past all that pop culture news stuff.
You're saying for the kids, you are the kid on this show.
What's a Twitter?
On the show today, though, we are going to be speaking about the Jacksonville Jaguars, and joining us to help talk some Jaguars football and their off-season so far is Taylor Doyle from the Heels and Helmets show. Taylor, it's great to have you on. How are you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Side note on that Brittany thing, because last year when it was like, there wasn't long that Jacksonville was in an actual lockdown from COVID. Like, I'm sure you saw it on the news. We had about 2 months of like where Florida was worried, and that's about it. But during that time, the Brittany thing kind of broke out on TikTok. So it was kind of popular on TikTok before all of a sudden it started getting big. And that's the only reason I know about it. But everyone's about the Free Brittany right now.
I only know about it as well because my girlfriend's house is just a house full of women, and that's all they talked about for about a month straight, just about Free Britney the whole time. And I just, yeah, Free Britney. Sure, okay. Let's free Britney. But anyway, before we move on to talk about some Jaguars, because we are a football podcast, not a Britney podcast, unfortunately. If you are watching us live on Twitter, please like this video, or on YouTube, like this video and subscribe to the Under Center podcast. That's where you'll find our podcast each and every time we upload a new show. If you do want to follow us on Twitter, just go to @UnderCenterPod. Instagram is the exact same, @UnderCenterPod. We are still looking to hit 1,000 followers before week 1 of the regular season. So we're on the way, and you can help us doing that by hitting follow or just sharing the profile and encouraging your friends to follow us there too. If you prefer the Facebook side, facebook.com/UnderCenterPod. But let's get into the show. And Taylor, actually, let's start with the 2020 season, because the narrative between the Jaguars and the Jets all year was who was going to tank for Trevor. And the Jets did Jets things where they just were in pole position, because obviously the Jaguars had that one win in week 1 against the Colts, and all the Jets had to do was lose out for the rest of the year. They couldn't even do that. But on the Jaguar side of things, was the upside out of possibly getting Trevor Lawrence outweighing such, you could say, a negative season?
I think in a way it was. The Jaguars fans wanted Trevor so badly, and this started in the beginning of the season, but the Jags came out and won their first game against the Colts, and then that was the only game they won all season. We didn't know in game 1, but they looked good. And so at first everyone was kind of like, oh, well, maybe things worked. Maybe getting rid of Leonard Fournette and James Robinson, which you guys, I'm sure, know his name by now, but was tremendous. He was like the kind of thing that held the Jaguars together last year and made fans excited for things on the field. But it definitely, as the season started rolling, was more and more like, please, Jets, lose. And it was a back and forth where we're like, okay, well, Jags screwed themselves again by winning a game, because now the Jets, there's no way. The Jets were so bad. There's no way they're going to lose a game. But I'll tell you that it was December 20th when they ended up winning. And Frank Gore, he's going up in like the pride of the Jaguars, because it was because of him that the Jets ended up winning. And I'll tell you, at the stadium that day, more people were up watching the Jets game than they were watching the Jags game at that moment, because they were like, what? This is happening. So that's just showing a little glimpse. I think it was up until about week 5, 6, there was a little hope of, okay, maybe they'll start figuring things out. But Minshew was having injury issues, and then him and Marone weren't getting along, and he kind of got like pushed to the side because they were upset he didn't disclose his injury. At that point, I think Jaguars fans realized, okay, it's time to just fully commit to this tank.
Yeah, definitely. And that was the thing that Gardner Minshew was a sort of bright spot for the Jaguars and becoming such a, you could say, a cult hero just with his mullet and stash combo. And the decision then by, as you were saying, Doug Marrone, sort of to keep him out of the team, obviously with the, like you mentioned, the injury issues that weren't disclosed, sort of was that sort of also the final nail in Coach Marrone's coffin in terms of, okay, this is definitely his last year in Jacksonville?
Yeah, I think that for multiple reasons, keeping Minshew out. Number one, I think Doug Marrone was doing it, and this would never come out and be said, I don't think, unless maybe like 20 years from down the road, like Doug Marrone does an interview with Barstool or something. I don't think it'd ever be talked about, but I truly think he knew that Minshew would have scraped a couple games across. Minshew just has that, like, he's not awesome, but he has just some weird ability to make crazy plays at the end of games. And a lot of the games were actually pretty close, winnable games. Josh Lambo, the kicker, who didn't miss forever and ever, was out last season. And so a couple games were determined by field goals. So I think Doug Marrone, number one, left Minshew out because he said, okay, if this whole city, like at this point, look, let's just commit to the tank like everybody else. Like I said, he would never come out and say that, but I do think that he kept Minshew out because I do think Minshew would have won a couple more games. Glennon's awful. A lot of teams have seen the awfulness of Glennon. But I also think he kind of had accepted the fact that I'm done here. So let me just kind of do what is working for me, what I want to do, make the fans happy for now because I'm done.
Yeah, and obviously then season ended, worst record in the league. So you get that number one overall pick. Probably the most, I could say, like easily predicted number one pick in a long time in the NFL draft. Trevor Lawrence, is he the savior now for Jacksonville? Is he the franchise guy for the next 10, 15 years that's going to help propel this team forward?
We think so. We hope so. Everything you see from Trevor Lawrence points that direction. I mean, the kid hasn't lost ever pretty much. In high school, he didn't lose. In college, he lost 2 games. There's always that transition to the pro where they're saying, hey, is that transfer going to happen? Is he going to be able to keep up with the pace? Everything we're hearing from camps is no issues whatsoever. He's already been here for a couple years. He's meshing with everyone. He's clicking. He's leading the team. The locker room respects him. Him and Urban Meyer get along great, and Urban loves him. They got Etienne, so they brought some comfortability for him too. So it's not just him thrown on a team where he knows nobody. He now has this guy that he just played with in college, and one of his main key factors to winning a lot of games in college was Travis Etienne. So I think the Jags fans are looking at this as, yes, like 10, 15 years, Trevor Lawrence is the guy. Whether that be, I don't think a lot of people are convinced it's this year. I think they're saying, hey, give us 2-3 years and they'll be in the mix.
Tyler, you mentioned Etienne as well there. How do you feel like the rest of the draft went for the Jaguars when you get the number one pick and such an obvious number one pick and a great talent in college in Lawrence that obviously everyone expects to translate over to the NFL, like you mentioned, maybe not necessarily first year, but certainly over the next 3-4 years. How did the rest of the draft go? How do you think they addressed the other needs? Because, of course, this team was terrible last season, and that's not all down necessarily solely to the quarterback position. So how do you feel they addressed all the other needs they had on this team?
I'm one of the ones that didn't love everything personally. I haven't loved a lot of the things that Urban Meyer's done in the offseason. I think he took a lot of other guys, even in the free agency, which just backtracking for a second, because for that, there's guys like Galladay available, and he goes for Marvin Jones, which Marvin Jones scores like crazy, and he didn't get the recognition because Kenny Galladay was in Detroit. But like everyone wants this one guy, and he kind of got the other guy, and that happened a lot during free agency. There's only a couple moves in free agency that I really liked, and those were defensive side of the ball. And then I feel like he was very repetitive in the draft. He other than aside from Trevor Lawrence, obviously, but you go get Travis Etienne, but you have a running back like James Robinson from last year, and then he gets Carlos Hyde, which who knows? Carlos Hyde is kind of up and down. 2019 had a pretty good season, but then he goes and drafts a running back that high. He drafted 2 or 3 guys that are coming off ACL injuries, one of them being Walker Little. That was one that I actually am interested to watch, though, because everything in camp points to Walker Little. He's a massive dude. Everyone says you wouldn't even notice that he had torn an ACL. Granted, it was 2 years ago, but the guy also hasn't played football in 2 years. He missed a whole season during injury and then opted out last year due to COVID. I think that a lot of things Urban did, he stuck with what he's comfortable with. A lot of these guys he had either tried to recruit when he was in college, or the coach they played for he was friends with, and that happened in free agency and the draft. A lot of people here like it. A lot of people think he did the defensive backs needed a lot of help. He got Shaq Griffin in free agency and then got guys like Cisco and Tyson Campbell from Georgia. So they did a lot of things that I guess you could say position-wise is what they needed. But to me, it was a lot of other guys, not the guy, not the corner that people are looking at, not the safety people were looking at. He went for guys that he was familiar with the name.
Taylor, I just want to bring you back to Travis Etienne. Obviously, he was college teammates with Trevor Lawrence. Do you think that played a big factor in it? Because I believe there was reports that the Jaguars originally wanted Kadarius Toney, which obviously the Giants ended up taking from the Bears trade back. Was it a bit of familiarity for Trevor Lawrence, or was it just because Travis Etienne was probably the best or second best running back available? And it's such a crowded running back room now on the Jaguars team as well.
Yeah, and I mean, Urban came out and blatantly said he wanted Kadarius Toney, and his heart was broken when he wasn't on the board. So I think that Urban hit the panic button a little bit, and in that panic button, he said, "What can I do to help Trevor?" And that goes to Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne is outstanding, and he also can receive. He's a receiving running back, so it's not like you were kind of forced to put him just specifically at this running back position to just compete with James Robinson. He even at one point made a comment about Carlos Hyde only being a third down back and kind of like having James Robinson and Travis Etienne battle. But I do think a major factor in him taking Etienne was just he was trying to think of the best way he could make Trevor Lawrence comfortable. And of course, a guy that you've played with, a guy that you know you can work with on the field and off the field definitely helps a rookie quarterback. But I think it was more of he hit the panic. The guy he wanted was gone, so he went to a guy that kind of he knew Trevor would want.
Yeah, and elsewhere in the draft, one that I took notice of was the defensive tackle they got in the 4th round, Jay Tufele, I think it's pronounced. I hope I pronounced it right. Anyway, from USC, and sort of helping that defensive line a little bit, where you could probably argue that one of the positions that maybe they should have strengthened in the offseason that maybe they haven't strengthened enough of just yet.
Yeah, the defense, I mean, going from 2017 to what they were last year, it is insane how bad the defense was last year. And you want to look at the offense and say, you had Gardner Minshew and Mike Glennon as a quarterback, so that must have been why the Jaguars were losing. But in large part, it was the defense. The defense pretty much lets whoever they were playing score almost every single possession, which you obviously cannot do because then your mediocre quarterback is playing catch up the entire game. And that's pretty much what happened. So that position up there is very important. I think the secondary and tight end were the 3 things that I think at the end of the season, I was like, we need to hammer these positions. They are changing. They're changing to a 3-4 defense. So I think in that Urban Meyer made a few moves that maybe people weren't completely expecting. They got Roy Robertson Harris out of Chicago, which I personally love. I was sad to see him leave from Chicago. He got like about 50% of the reps there, but Chicago's line is so strong that he was just kind of that other guy for a couple years. And I think he could be a big part in the Jags defense. It's Tufele, and I don't know a ton about Tufele. He was one of the ones that coming out of the draft was one of the higher ranked. Okay, you got him in the 4th round, so solid pick for a 4th rounder. I I think there's a couple questions that I've heard about him in camp, though, that everyone wasn't he wasn't standing out. He wasn't looking bad, but a lot of people were saying he just kind of looks like another guy out there. There was nothing where they were like, okay, this guy is a good pick. Or who is that guy? A lot of times at camp, it's more of that. Like you see something happening and then you're like, hold on, who just did that? And you look at the jersey number and you're like, oh, that's Tufele. Everyone was kind of saying there wasn't really that happening. But I do think he definitely improved the defense. There's no way that you could say from last year to now that he hadn't done anything. Miles Jack held the defense down last year. If it wasn't for him, it would be nobody. A guy like Josh Allen is looking for a comeback year. Jags are counting on Josh Allen a ton, and he kind of just fell between the cracks last season. And so I think that maybe Urban is more of hoping that these little pieces that he picked up in the offseason are more of just puzzle pieces to fit to help these guys out in like more of a depth outlook.
Taylor, really quickly before we move on from the draft, one thing I wanted to ask you about, and it kind of stood out to me because when we follow our teams over here, we don't always get the same amount of blanket coverage of all the other teams. So only sometimes we get these kind of news stories that pop up from other teams. And one thing that jumped out at me during the draft process was a quote by Lawrence essentially saying, I'm more than a football player. I love to play football, but it's not my life. I have plenty of other things going on. And that really seemed to get a significant reaction out of people. How worried were people about his dedication? And was it as much of a big deal as maybe it looked at the time?
I think it was. I think national media made that into something it completely was not. Here in Jacksonville and our local media, that quote didn't worry us at all. We weren't afraid that maybe football wasn't his life, or maybe it's not his number one priority, and that's going to affect him being a pro football player. Because the thing with Trevor is he's proven for years that football is an important thing to him. And I think it's okay to have another life. We see these guys who just invest all of their heart and soul into this game. And if it doesn't work out, what else is going to happen? So I think for Trevor, he has that balance of, he's so young and mature. I don't know if you guys have heard some of the recent interviews he's done or even post games from Jaguars, but you would think he's a 30-year-old quarterback that's been in the league for 8 years, because the way he talks, the way he presents himself, the way he answers questions, he's just so mature. And I think in part it was that a lot of people took that into having a chip on his shoulder. And I think that was a lot of the things people were saying about it. But to me, it was more of, he was just saying look, I know how to play football. Football is second nature to me, but it's not everything. He's newly married. He's in a new city. He's done with college now. He's now an NFL quarterback. So there's a lot of things that he's juggling, but I don't think that takes away from him being a football player.
Great. Let's move on to you got the new quarterback. Now you got your new coach. Urban Meyer signed his deal, obviously under the basis that I'm guessing he was going to get Trevor Lawrence, his first job in the NFL after spending so long in the college game. There are some doubts, and I'll admit there are some doubts on my side of things as well, whether he'll be able to make that transition to the NFL, especially after being so long out of the game as well. But how has the appointment gone down in Jacksonville with locals?
I will tell you that I am probably one of only 50 people that did not like the Urban Meyer hiring. So you asked one of the few people in Jacksonville to do this interview that is not a fan. I just think he needs to prove some things to me. I think that I don't trust him. I think that after a couple years, if he's not winning, that I don't guarantee he'll stay. He's bailed on other teams. I think he would bail on a pro team. I also don't love a lot of the things he's done this offseason. I think from the get-go, he hired Chris Doyle, who has a very questionable situation before. And especially on Helmets and Heels, we're very vocal about that kind of thing, the hiring of coaches, the players who are getting away with whatever side nonsense that I just can't stand that kind of thing. So he started with that. Chris Doyle resigned. So that kind of got, moved past it. They made some more hirings. But then, like I said, free agency, he comes out, makes some comments about how he doesn't like free agency because pretty much he doesn't have all of the control that he's used to having in college. In college, you can go schmooze the guys and you can go to their house and say, hey, come look at our facilities and come do this. It's not like that in the NFL. In the NFL, he realized quick it's a lot harder. These guys want money. These guys most guys want to go to a team that they know they can win with, especially in free agency, because a lot of free agency guys are older guys where they're kind of like, okay, we're hitting our late 20s, early 30s, and we're wanting to be on a team where we can actually compete. And Urban Meyer, I don't think loved free agency. He hammered from the get-go of free agency that one of the main rooms he needed to fix was tight end, and he goes and gets Tim Tebow, who's never even played tight end, and keeps O'Shaughnessy. That's fine. I think O'Shaughnessy's making a little move. He got Luke Farrell also coming off an injury. I just didn't love that. I didn't love that he kind of reached for Travis Etienne. So there's a lot of things that kind of have pointed to negatives for me. I will say that I have liked that he's very vocal about needing help from other coaches. He's surrounded himself with an elite coaching staff, which I think will help him. A lot of guys that have been in the NFL for a while, a lot of guys that can kind of help him through this transition. I just am not convinced until I see it on the field that he is going to be able to just make that, because you don't see, you can name very few guys that made that straight from college to head coach transfer and it worked out right away. 5 years, yeah, like give him 4 or 5 years, and I think that maybe he could start easing into it. But do I think Urban Meyer would wait 4 or 5 years to accumulate wins? No. So aside from me, though, Jacksonville was excited. Jacksonville, a lot of people here are Gators fans. He was in Florida for a long time, won Florida a lot of games. And so a lot of people are confident that, like, hey, he's one of the winningest coaches in college football, one of the best coaches in college football. They one of the websites recently kind of compared him to Pete Carroll. And they were saying, like Pete Carroll, granted, he kind of went back and forth, but we're saying like what he was able to do when he came back and was in Seattle. And they never played against each other. So that's going to be an interesting matchup this year, because I think that some people compare to that and some people compare him to like, okay, well, it's really hard to make this instant. Like it's a different world in pro football. And Urban's very used to just kind of being able to ease his way into things and win where he goes, because he does have that recruiting ability. You don't recruit in the NFL. So it's going to be interesting to me to see how these offseason moves kind of add up. The city of Jacksonville's pumped. They like Urban Meyer. They think it's exactly what Jacksonville needs. They think that is perfect for Trevor Lawrence. Having a coach that's so relatable to college players to help Trevor also transition. It's a little scary for me, but.
Yeah, it's an interesting comparison with the Pete Carroll team, because he's not just assigned a lot of ex-Seattle players in the offseason, but he's also brought in like Brian Schottenheimer and Darrell Bevel to be coaches on the offense as well. So he's definitely taken that sort of Seattle influence there to Jacksonville. But you mentioned it briefly at the start there, talking about Urban Meyer, and it was Chris Doyle, which we talked about on the show when it was first announced and when he subsequently then resigned a day later. In an NFL organization as big as Jacksonville is, or the Jaguars are, like when they have so many, people that have their ear close to the ground, and like for disappointment to actually like make disappointment and think that everything could be swept under the rug, I just felt it was quite naive. You could say it was a college style appointment where it'd be forgotten about in a couple of weeks if he was still on a college team, which was never going to happen when it comes to the NFL. And, it's like this guy shouldn't, like the stuff that he was alleged to have done, it should never have been anywhere near an NFL side. And it seems as though like he was just looking for people that he knew to be around him. And I think it was more like be damned the allegations. It just seemed like it was a very naive move for someone who should be as experienced as Urban Meyer is.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it was a very college move of him. He, in the college realm, you see it a lot where it does get kind of swept away. So he wasn't I don't think he at all expected to be what it was. I think he expected it to be in the headlines for a couple of days, and then he'll keep making hirings, and those things will kind of overshadow that. But the difference with the NFL, especially right now with this day and age, is you can't do that. And especially as one of your first moves as a head coach in the NFL, and for a team that is already in the negative spotlight constantly. And I think that's why a lot of Jacks fans were immediately really, really mad, because they're the joke constantly. And it's been seasons and seasons of like, okay, who cares about the Jaguars? No one wants to go to Jacksonville. Jacksonville can't win games. Their quarterbacks are a joke. The 2017 season was a fluke. And now they get this little bit of like excitement, and they get Urban Meyer, and then it's shot down because one of his first hirings is this guy who brings negative attention to Jacksonville again. Thank goodness he resigned almost immediately. I think that was more of him being like, Urban, like, this is your chance to try to, like, I'm going to ruin this if I stay here. But I agree. I think it was a very college move of him. I think that he's done it before. We know he had some assistant coaches in Ohio State that was also doing some things he shouldn't have been doing. And he kind of swept that under the rug for a while also. So he's not a trustworthy person to me, and I'm not a big fan. He's a great college football coach. So, but I think I also like good humans. So I know a lot of football fans kind of are like, oh, like he plays good football. But for me, it's like, I want somebody who I know I can trust. I know someone that I want a coach who, these guys can go to and be like, hey, this is happening. Like, I need help, whether it's on or off the field. And I'm not quite sure if Urban would ever say anything negative about one of the guys if it did come out. That was one thing about Doug Marrone, is he would call out the players and say, like, nope, this isn't working. Like, Leonard Fournette, go sit on the bench because you threw a tantrum. And like, most coaches will not do that, and I don't see Urban Meyer doing that. But
yeah, I think I agree with you. I've never really liked Urban Meyer either. I follow the college football game a little bit closer than the two lads. Like you said, I did hear whispers of allegations on his own coaching staff. Then obviously the hire as soon as he got the Jaguars wasn't great. I didn't even particularly like him on College Game Day. I thought he looked like a peacock, and he was kind of saying, oh, well, I'm the best coach ever, and I'm just going to sit here and look pretty while everyone tells me how brilliant I am. But given that you said he doesn't always stick around for teams, you mentioned that he has experienced a lot of winning, which is not the history of the Jaguars in recent years. They've struggled. You said you feel like he would only go maybe 4 or 5 years, that if he doesn't reach his winning standard, he would leave. Do you think his contract might be terminated before he gets to that point? In other words, how long a leash has he got to turn this team around before Khan and the ownership start to question whether this was the right move or not?
I would say they have a bad history of letting guys stick around for way too long. I think that they would have even a little bit longer of a leash, because they would factor in that he's new to the NFL, in addition to being a new head coach in the NFL, in addition to having a rookie quarterback. So there's a lot of things that are going to factor. I would say maybe around the same time, that 4 or 5 year mark, if he is not, and obviously there are signs far before that. If after a couple years, you can kind of see if he's developing a lot of these players. You'll start to see the Jacks have so much money in free agency, and that's what makes me frustrated, is like they had the most money to spend in free agency and got all these like second guys and not like positions that they necessarily absolutely needed. So I think that will start catching up with him if in a couple years this is kind of repetitive. And let's say another offseason goes by next year. This year isn't great. Trevor's not developing. A lot of these younger guys aren't developing. There's a ton of penalties like there has been the last couple years. I think that after a couple years, it might start to be talked about, but I still think they'll give him 4 or 5 years to try and figure it out.
Yeah, and then looking forward to the 2021 season, it's a difficult schedule, to sort of say the least. Sort of facing two of the tougher divisions this coming year, with the NFC West and the AFC East. You got that week 7 bye just after the London game against Miami as well, which is sort of a regular occurrence now Jacksonville, obviously with the Cans having such a close relationship with London, especially owning Fulham Football Club over there too. What did you make of the schedule yourself? Is there any sort of standout games that you'd be looking for to sort of see a good marker to see how far the team has progressed?
Yeah, I think that the number one test, I think, is a lot of the division games, obviously. Houston is a train wreck right now. So definitely need to just beat Houston in both of the games. Obviously, the Deshaun Watson situation is kind of up in the air. I don't see him start football in Houston because it's just some of them are saying it'll be a couple years before this trial's even done. So who knows? I think that there's a lot, even with Tannehill. Tannehill is not an amazing quarterback. Somehow he's like managed to do some things in Tennessee. Derrick Henry is an absolute monster. And then now Julio adding to this. So it's a little scary, but I think that the AFC there's winnable games in there. There's Houston. I think you could split with Indy and Tennessee. Outside of that, it's hard. Let me pull it up because I just have not memorized it. So I want to kind of go through.
Hey, Jake, are we gonna sit here and let Dara say that the NFC West is one of the toughest divisions of football? Oh, poor Jaguars, they have to play it. Come on, Dara.
Sorry, they don't get the
East is so much tougher.
They don't get the NFC least.
The teams are so well balanced. You literally flip a coin to pick the winner.
It is literally the definition of a perfect division.
It's the perfect division in football. That's what we're going for. NFC East, perfect division in football.
Yeah.
I don't even have to dignify that with a response. It's just so ridiculous.
Yeah.
We'll see how much you're crying now. When Wilson can't throw the ball for nothing like he could at the end of last season.
He can't come back up off that cliff.
I tell you, someone's gone 30 for 30 and it's Russell Wilson.
Oh, that cliff, you mean the Ryan Fitzpatrick cliff? It was named after him because he falls off it so many times.
Oh yeah, that's magic. But yeah, so I don't know, just glancing. Yeah, just glancing. So as we've kind of assessed the schedule on our shows, the beginning looks like winnable games to start. Like I said, Houston's a train wreck. Broncos, they don't even know who their quarterback's going to be, I don't think, to start game one. There's a lot of things about the Broncos I like. I think they have a lot of weapons that could definitely be breakout players this next season. I love Vic Fangio. He was the defensive coordinator for the Bears, but I do think he is way better being a defensive coordinator than he is a head coach. So I'm interested to see if that can kind of step up. Kyler Murray, a lot of people here are saying that's a very winnable game. I don't know. I love Kyler Murray. I think he's just going to get better. Bengals, Joe Burrow obviously is going to be back. So I think a lot of this is just like pretty much going to come down to a lot of quarterbacks because you have, like I said, it's a divisional game. You talked about the Dolphins. The Dolphins defense was so good, especially in the second half of last year. I'm interested to see how Tua is. You saw him get benched twice last year. So that'll be interesting. Seattle, I think that's going to be, obviously it's in Seattle, number one. So having Trevor play with a full stadium is going to be very interesting. Bills are really good. Colts are really good. 49ers, when they're healthy, they can be unstoppable. Falcons, I don't know. I think Matt Ryan's kind of on that downward slope of his career. He makes things happen, but there's a lot of just weird things happening in that. They got Kyle Pitts, which I think will help a lot, but no Julio. So, but they have Calvin Ridley. So as soon as you say they don't have this, you find another piece that they kind of put together. LA is really good. That's always a fun one for us because Jalen Ramsey pretty much stuck a big middle finger to Jacksonville, and Jacksonville cannot stand Jalen Ramsey with any part of their being now. So that game's always fun. I think that Rams will probably be favored to win by a ton, and Jags will make that a really good game just because they'll be after Ramsey the whole time. It'll be fun to see Matthew Stafford there. I just honestly, when I look at our schedule, I can only see maybe 4 wins when I first look at this. And that being Jets, Rams, and the Houston games both times. If we could split some of the other ones, I think it's good. I don't even think they'd be able to beat the Patriots, whoever. I don't know if it's going to be Mac Jones or if it's going to be Cam Newton. it's not pretty. Like the more we go in the beginning, like I said, I think there could win. You could win maybe a couple, 2, 3 in the first, but then it just gets really, really difficult. And to have a week 7 bye, it's a little early. You'd like to have it a little later. And I think, especially with so many young guys that are going to be playing, it does not look like there's very many wins. But I personally don't think that Jags fans are going to be judging the season off of wins technically this season. I think a lot is going to be Trevor's numbers. If he could have a Justin Herbert here and kind of like, even if it's only 6 wins, but has his numbers, I think people would be satisfied here.
That's what we always say about Jake when he takes his helmet off. It doesn't look good. It does not look good.
It don't look pretty, but
it don't look pretty. It don't look pretty.
Taylor, we're 30-ish minutes into the show, and we haven't even mentioned the most important bit of news at Jacksonville Jaguars all season was Tim Tebow signing as a tight end. This is just the best piece of news I've ever heard. Quarterback turned tight end. I have 2 questions for you. Well, one, he looks jacked. He looks like he's a monster now. He looks huge. I have 2 questions, though. What are his chances of making the team? And say he does make the team, what is the over-under on thrown touchdown passes from Tim Tebow?
That's the only thing that I could go to. Number one is that he's trying to use him as like an almost Taysom type weapon, because anytime you ask Urban Meyer, he's like, I'm signing him as a tight end, but he's not going to play tight end. And I'm like, okay, then why did you even do that? Why did you start this frenzy of signing this guy who's never played tight end? Actually, he was like begged to play tight end for Denver back in the day. And he was like, no, I'll never play tight end. That's not my position. And then now he's like a little bored with baseball and sucks at it. So he's like, well, maybe I'll go back to football. Jacksonville is obsessed with Tim Tebow. Like, he is their Lord and Savior here. And so when it happened, it was like the biggest joke to a lot of us. We were like, this isn't real. Number one, it dropped on draft day. It was like, we're getting Trevor Lawrence. And they're like, oh, Jags plan to sign Tim Tebow as tight end. And everyone was like, what? Like, that doesn't even make sense. But then it really happened. And he's been going through camp. I mean, people are saying that he's definitely in shape. That's the one thing. They're like, he doesn't look like he doesn't fit. He looks like he should be out on the football field, but he doesn't look like he should be over with like the blocking pads, blocking with the tight ends, because everyone's like, it looks just a little goofy, to be honest with you. He hasn't dropped a ball from what I've heard, so that's interesting. Granted, you're getting perfect passes from Trevor Lawrence with no pressure pretty much, but I do not think he'll make the team. I think that there's like a 20% chance that he'd make it. If he did, I really don't think it would just be like a straight up tight end position. I think Urban Meyer would do something kooky to fit him in the roster just because he wants Tim Tebow on his roster. If he did make the roster, just because I think that it's goofy, he'd probably end up having like 5 touchdowns this season and feel like okay, where you're like, wow, he caught a couple passes, like when Jason Witten came back and everyone's like, oh, he's done. But then you're like, oh, wow, he's actually like playing kind of good. So I think I just don't see it. I see maybe their training camp, there'll be a little talk that he'll make the team, but by the end, it's going to come down to final numbers. Urban Meyer actually just recently did an interview, and in that he said, like, look, I only have this number of guys in the NFL. I'm not used to that. So if the number doesn't fit, I can't keep him. Like, as much as I'd want Tim Tebow on the team, I have a certain number of positions that I have to fill and that I need, and depth is important. And you don't need 7 tight ends on your team.
That's true. Because I think I figured it out. So if we put together that he's a playoff quarterback, he's played quarterback in the playoffs for the Broncos. Then he left, did a bit of baseball. So he's used to kind of throwing different shaped objects. Urban Meyer said he signed him on not necessarily to play tight end. So are we looking at the world's strongest armed water boy who can get that water bottle right out to midfield, doesn't need to run on the pitch, he's just launching those things right on the hash marks? I think I've figured it out. Urban Meyer is a step ahead. He's looking for that H2O hydration.
That's a good one. He's like, this one's for you, Trevor, and like from 30.
Then it hits so shocked to see in the head. He's like, oh, my bad. Always had accuracy issues. I'm sorry.
Unless there's a bit of a vengeful side of him, maybe he does chuck it at Lawrence's throwing hand just a little too hard. Oh no, coach, you have no quarterback. Yes, I'll go in for week 1 if you want, just to cover.
I think a lot, in all seriousness, I think a lot of the ex-players and the ex-coaches that I've been listening to about this are like, look, sure, as you said, Taylor, he's an athletic specimen, right? We know he can run fast and he's built to play American football, and he looks like he has great hands, and that's not really what they're worried about. You can scheme some things to get him open and throw the ball, but if you're going to sit him there and rely on him to block a stand-up outside linebacker or a defensive end whose job it is to beat guys who have trained to block you, and you're trusting him to block for the face of your franchise for the next 10, 15, 20 years, if Jacksonville's lucky, that there's just no room for him on the pitch.
Yeah, and I think, and part of that too is you don't have a tight end 1 either. Like if you had a Travis Kelce or a Kittle and you want to throw Tebow in there to just like have some fun every now and then, okay. But you don't. You have no tight end that is actually going to be able to block, like you said, your franchise quarterback that you want for a long time. You have no tight end that is going to go out there and consistently make plays. So then you guy who's definitely not going to consistently make tight end plays, and it's almost offensive. If I was a tight end in the league, I would be kind of offended that like you think you can come in here after not playing for 9 years football at all and play the tight end position where the drop off for tight ends. I mean, there's 5, like a couple really, really good ones, then some good ones, and then the drop-off's pretty deep. So, like, where are you going to land on that and on that list?
Yeah, I give it until like week 2 when he goes up against Von Miller to be thrown on his ass so many times in that game. It's going to be a bit of a massacre, and then he has to go up against JJ Watt the week after. Oh, poor guy.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we're going to end the chat here, Taylor. But before we go, for anyone who's watching or listening, that's interested in listening to more of your takes, where can they find your show?
Yeah, so we have, if you go on my Twitter also, it's TayDoll1010XL. And our show is on, you can either stream it, so on 1010xl.com, which is the numbers 1010xl.com. You can find all of our previous episodes on there. And so if you want to kind of backtrack to however far, or even the draft, we've had some fun ones. Actually, a couple weeks after the draft was a really cool one for us, because normally we're only Tuesday nights. This specific week, we actually did a show every night, and we had a ton of guests on there, including David Garrard did a whole show with us, which was really fun because he kind of got in depth with a lot of the position groups that Urban Meyer was potentially at that time had just drafted and was potentially going to try and make the team or that mini camp and all of that. It was a really fun show. But we're Tuesdays. You can also go to 1010xl.com on Tuesday nights, which is 6 p.m. Eastern time here. I cannot do the math of like where you guys are in the time frame. But it's 6 p.m. Eastern time on okay, yes, that time you can listen to us live, or always just head over to 1010xl.com and all of our shows will be up first thing Wednesday morning with whatever we did on Tuesdays, and we also post them on the Twitter also.
Excellent stuff, Taylor. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today. We hope to get the chance to speak to you, if not before the season, definitely at some point during it.
Yeah, thanks, guys. This is fun.
No problem. So that is it for this edition of the show. If you haven't already, please make sure you like this video and subscribe to the Under Center podcast on YouTube. Also, if you prefer, go to our Twitter and our Instagram at Under Center Pod. You will find us there, and we also post the show live on Twitter there every week too. Go to our Facebook, facebook.com/Under Center Pod. Jake and Fionn, thanks so much again as usual.
Thank you very much.
Nice one.
We will be back again soon with another off-season team. We are nearing the end. We've only got 2 left, and conveniently enough, it's the 2 Super Bowl teams that we have to speak about. It's got the Chiefs and the Bucs. So we'll have our chats with them soon. But until then, stay safe, and we'll speak to you soon.